So good morning, everyone, and welcome to our webinar. We have the lovely Sarah Hodges here this morning. Just a quick background, I'm Eller Mallchok with Jumpstart Foundry, and this is going to be a webinar on entrepreneurial self-care. We have Sarah Hodges joining us. She is in Grand Rapids this morning. She's going to be talking a lot about how entrepreneurs and founders can care for themselves, particularly through the rough stages of getting things off the ground as a startup. Sarah has lots of experience, over 10 years of experience in this space as a executive and self-coach. She started her career in New York and moved back to the Midwest. How many years ago, Sarah?
Just last year. Been here a little over a year. Yep.
Yeah, so she's been working with lots of founders, particularly in the healthcare and biotech space. So has great experience in this. Just want to say we really wanted to start the year off, start 2020 off, focused on self-care. It's something that we talked a lot about with our founders, most recently at our Founders Summit, where, you know, if you're not taking care of yourself, you can't really take care of your company. And something that as an early stage investor, I think about a lot is making sure our founders are taking care of themselves. Because if they're not, then I worry about the company and how things are going to go. It's fundamental that founders put themselves at the center and their health and well-being at the center of what they're doing. So without further ado, I'm going to let Sarah take it away. Some quick just logistics for the meeting. Everyone that is attending, you will be able to submit questions through the chat feature. We're not going to be using the Q&A feature. Instead, we'll be using the chat feature that you can access at the bottom of your screen. We'll be recording this webinar and sending it out afterwards. It should last, your presentation should last around 25, 30 minutes or so, maybe less.
Sure. Depends on how fast I talk.
And we'll be able to, again, open it up for questions at the end. So, Sarah, I'm going to go off video and on mute and let you present and take it from here.
Cool. Sounds good. Okay. Let me share my screen here. So I'm Sarah Hodges. I run Hodges Coaching. Executive Solutions is my tagline. Very snazzy. And I, met with Josh actually from Jumpstart, and he got me connected with Eller. And we've been talking about doing a webinar series for a while, and decided to do one on self-care to kick off the new year. So when we decided on self-care, I was like, yeah, sure, let's do this. And then I was like, no, because this is a really it's a hard topic. It's kind of a charged word. Like, everyone has a different idea of what self-care means. Some people are like, oh, it's baths and copious amounts of chocolate, which is really self-indulgence, but can be self-care. Self-care right now for me is the fact that I'm wearing pajama pants and a quilt over my lap right now because I'm in my home office. So I'm just enjoying a little bit of self-care to soothe myself while I'm doing this very exciting presentation for all of you. And some people think that self-care is like, I'm going to get up and run a mile every morning, which is awesome, or I'm going to cook meals for myself every night. But self-care for founders is really challenging because I work with a lot of you guys and you are a busy bunch. So let's just get started with the agenda today. We're going to go over stress because stress and self-care kind of go hand in hand. Then we're going to go over self-care and some specific tools that I have for you to get started on it. We're going to review and discuss. And I want to remind you that today is part of different webinars. So we're going to get very specific on something that you can introduce to your life. It's really easy, where next time we'll talk more about self-care for leadership and self-care for making more money and finding investors. Okay. So kind of to delineate the whole focus of today, it's important to remember that startup success is a marathon and it's not a sprint. You guys are in this for the long game. So how do you reach the finish line with your health and your relationships intact? I cannot tell you of how many stories I've heard where shortly before the IPO, the founder gets a divorce or has a heart attack, or, and like Eller was saying earlier, when you, have a startup that you're invested in, you're invested in that founder as well. I just talked to a VC yesterday who was discussing a startup that he was invested in. He's like, the founder is so unhealthy and they're not interested in giving the startup any more money because they don't know how long the founder will last, quite frankly, or if they can get to that finish line with their health intact. But here's the problem, which I mentioned earlier. You have no time. A lot of you guys are working 12 hours a day or more. You guys are like, time for self-care. Like, I don't even get, it's like 8 hours of sleep a night, try 5. They're like, is self-care, a caffeine IV? I'm sure there's a startup for that, actually. But like, can I get an IV with caffeine into my body? Because that really feels like self-care to me. Like, whatever is going to help me get through the day. You guys have no time. So that's a big problem for me too, right? Is when I'm creating this presentation, it's like, how do I give you tips and tricks for self-care when you are maxed out? So when you're maxed out, obviously you're experiencing a lot of stress. So let's go over some stress basics. And I'm about to say something that might blow your mind a little bit, is very revolutionary, okay? I'm gonna say something crazy because stress is a very charged word. Stress is good. Stress is actually a really, really good thing. Stress is why we are alive today. It is responsible for human survival in many ways. You guys are familiar with the fight or flight. If you're being chased by a lion, you want to be able to fight back or probably run really, really fast, right? The thing is, we're not really chased by a lot of lions anymore. But stress is still good because intentional stress, taking on stress intentionally with a purpose, is how we learn and grow. Weightlifting, is an example. You're taking on stress on your body and your muscle's going to grow over time. Or when you're learning new ideas, that's essentially a stress on your brain and you're going to grow over time. Starting a company is definitely a stress where you're going to intentionally grow over time. So stress is actually a really, really beneficial, awesome thing. And you're not going to be able to start a company or take that company to being sold or an IPO without a tremendous amount of stress. Here's a self-gratifying slide for you. This is my most recent stress. This is Grace. She was born September 29th, so she's 3.5 months old. And this was stressful, right? But also a very good stress. Love her to death. Definitely would have benefited from a caffeine IV at that point. My diet was primarily Cheetos. So, but Grace is an amazing stress that I would do 100 times over again. So stress is good. Chronic stress is what's bad. Chronic stress is right when that stress is just continuing over and over and over again, and we're not getting any relief from it. And chronic stress over time causes pathology in the body, which I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with, but it also causes pathology in the brain. We know from neuroplasticity that your brain will change over time to actually be more reactive to stress. You can see hypertrophy of the amygdala, for example. So chronic stress is what you do not want. And so on that same vein of talking about the brain, which is what I'm the most interested in when it comes to stress. When we are in fight or flight, when we're experiencing chronic stress, most of the energy is going to the lizard brain and the mammal system. So it's down in the brain stem. It's our more primitive brains, okay? It is difficult to fully utilize your neocortex where you do, where you have creativity and imagination and problem solving, and to fully utilize that prefrontal cortex. So if you are in chronic stress, okay, you are not bringing your most efficient brain to your startup. And that's a problem that we want to solve for. So here are some of the success skills that you need for a startup that also utilize higher brain function. We're talking critical thinking, making sound decisions. Emotional regulation is huge. When you're under chronic stress, you're going to be very reactive, and that's not going to be good for the people who work for you or for your investors. You want to be able to have clear communication and outline the next steps for your staff and make sure everybody understands what your plan is. You want to be able to reason, rationalize, socially engage with the investors that you're speaking with. You want to have mental clarity. I know a lot of people who are overstressed will complain of brain fog or the inability to focus. They will complain of low energy. Creativity is going to be out the window if you have no energy and you can't focus, and you will struggle with logic, deeply connecting with another person, and taking risks. And startup is a risky business. So literally all of the things that you need to be successful in your startup, because of how your brain changes under chronic stress, it's sabotaged. Really, chronic stress hijacks your brain. I think that's kind of the takeaway here from Stress 101. So how do we avoid chronic stress? Recovery. Recovery is absolutely essential. So after each stress trigger, your body and brain need to recover to avoid the negative chronic stress. So if the lion is chasing you and you are fast enough to get away from him, you need some time to breathe. If you are weightlifting and you're doing an arm day, you don't want to do an arm day typically 2 days in a row, right? You take a break from arm day, you need to recover. And that's how your body gets back to homeostasis. It feels safe again, and you have all that energy available for higher brain function to have an awesome startup. So that means that self-care is essential. If you want to use your best brain, self-care is absolutely necessary for recovery. But you still have a problem, right? You still have no time. So you know that you need it, you know that you have to recover, but when are you going to do it? Like, it's 3 a.m. when you're already not sleeping. It's a really big challenge. So let's talk about Self-Care 101 and some ways in which you can integrate self-care in a way you maybe haven't thought of before. And it starts with your self-talk. Changing your self-talk takes virtually no extra time, but it can really soothe that stress response. And I'm going to teach you now some very specific strategies to make that happen. So let's talk about the self-talk that you probably have going on in your head right now if you are a normal human being walking around on this planet. Have you met your inner a-hole? By the way, usually I don't censor this, but this is being recorded, so I thought I should. But your inner a-hole, I'm sure you're familiar with your inner a-hole. Every single one of you has an inner a-hole walking around within you who is planting seeds of self-doubt and making you feel like an imposter and telling you that you're not worth it and magnifying negative situations. Way back a long time ago, before I became an executive coach, I was actually a professional opera singer, believe it or not. And the inner a-hole was strong as a professional opera singer because you're out on stage putting yourself out there. And so you're singing an aria and your inner a-hole is like, oh, that note sucks. And you keep singing it and you're like, oh, you're never going to be a star, or whatever it might be saying. It's making you feel like you shouldn't be out on stage. And if your inner a-hole is constantly talking to you and telling you all this stuff, you're not going to be able to focus on the job at hand, whether that is singing or a presentation, at an investor conference, right? You're not going to be able to fully utilize that higher brain function because you're in this fight or flight, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God, the whole time when your inner a-hole shows up. So some tips for dealing with your inner a-hole. First of all, you want to get to know it, okay? And this means turning up your awareness about your self-talk throughout the day, every day. So some things to pay attention for. Your inner a-hole is probably talking to you all day long. It is a major, major cause of chronic stress, primarily emotional and decision-making stress. And there are a few of you right now who may be like, I don't think I have an inner a-hole, because you may not even notice it. It's so pervasive and it's been part of your life for such a long time that you may be like, I'm not, but I guarantee you when you walk away from here today and you start, paying a little bit more attention to it, you'll be like, wow, it shows up a lot. And it does for pretty much everybody. So what kind of things does it say? Here's just a few of innumerable nasty things that the inner a-hole can say to you. It can predict catastrophic futures, right? I'm going to go bankrupt. Something small that happens, the inner a-hole will turn into something very, very big. Kind of the whole turning a molehill into a mountain. Am I saying that right? Anyway, it plants a lot of self-doubt. It pretends to read minds. So the inner a-hole often perceives a situation and tells a story about the situation, right? And what that person was thinking, and then it magnifies it and predicts something catastrophic. One of the most common things that the inner asshole does is it blames, shames, and guilts you. So it makes you feel like you are inadequate, unworthy, have less value all the time. You're too fat, too this, too whatever. And something that I see most commonly with startup founders is the heavens reward fallacy. It's the, if I, just do everything I can. If I just like kill myself right now, and by that I mean like you know, you just focus completely on the startup and you don't sleep and you don't eat and you just work, that eventually it'll all pay off and I'll have millions or billions of dollars and then I can relax on a beach somewhere. But again, if it finally all pays off and you have millions and billions of dollars, but you have no relationships and then you die 3 weeks later of a heart attack, that's not going to get you very far. The heavens reward fallacy is not really valid. All right, so the next thing you want to do once you start getting to know your inner a-hole and pay attention to it and turn up that awareness is to notice patterns. Like, when does the inner a-hole show up? It might be on your way to the office, before investor meetings, while reviewing financials, before meeting with lawyers, while sitting on the toilet, because that happens, in the shower. At 3:50 a.m., you wake up with a cortisol surge and you're like, oh my God, my company's gonna go under. When mom calls. I have quite a few clients where the inner a-hole turns up when mom calls. When your phone rings. Sometimes for me, it's when I'm about to go get the mail. I'm like certain that I'm gonna get something from the IRS. Why? I have no idea. My inner a-hole just tells me that. It's nonsensical. So it can happen at any time. Okay, so the third step, once you become aware, once you notice patterns, once you notice triggers, which by the way will give you a lot of information about yourself, about what specifically stresses you out, then you want to start to talk back. You want to be able to have a conversation with that inner a-hole and replace that voice, which, okay, this is kind of cheesy, but I love it, with your inner cheerleader. Okay? This is real stuff, and I'm going to go over the science with you in a second, okay? Because your inner cheerleader, when you follow a very specific pattern, actually neutralizes the stress response. So it allows you to recover. And really, it's the voice of self-compassion, and it helps you return to higher brain function. So let's talk a little bit about self-compassion, kind of scientifically, what it really is. Dr. Kristen Neff was the pioneer researcher in self-compassion, and she realized that there are basically 3 elements to self-compassion. So it's really a practice with 3 specific parts. One is self-kindness, understanding and not punishment. Another is a sense of common humanity, like this is normal. And then mindfulness. I call it labeling the emotion without exaggerating or ignoring it. So what we've found is that through studies and measuring like things like salivary cortisol, is that self-compassion neutralizes the stress response. This is really, really cool because this is basically self-care that doesn't take any extra time. You're just replacing, negative thoughts with more positive ones. I don't want to make it that black and white, but to make it easier. And what they found, it looks like this is a little bit covering my slide here, but basically reduces cortisol levels and promotes physiological well-being. It reduces physiological stress and it protects against the negative physiological effects of chronic stress. So self-compassion neutralizes the stress response and then is a buffer for future stress triggers. And that's really, really powerful when you have no extra time to take a bath or go for a run or whatever that may be. And then paradoxically, you know what I mean? Self-compassion is a motivator. This is really cool. So it actually motivates you to improve personal weaknesses. It reduces fear of failure and improves coping strategies, and it helps you bounce back from failures and regrets. And this makes a lot of sense, right? Because if it neutralizes a stress response and it allows you to use higher brain function, you can go out and intentionally take on stress because you have then recovered, right? So it's really cool because I've noticed when I've been coaching clients who are just beating themselves up. I was coaching a very, very prominent financial advisor. He's the head of the entire financial firm and advisement firm, and he was beating himself up because they were so great that he became kind of complacent about prospecting and finding new assets under management. And I just asked him, like, how can you give yourself a break? And he kind of walked through that self-compassion process with me. And immediately, right after he gave himself a break, he got a surge of a ton of amazing ideas to bring in new assets and who to contact and what to say. And I've seen this time and time and time again with executives who've been beating themselves up. Once they apply this, they just get a surge of amazing ideas and insights. So I'm hoping that happens for you guys as well. So here's how I break down self-compassion and how I use it as the voice of the self-cheerleader to respond to that inner a-hole. And I go through these 3 steps in order. So the first one is like, what emotion do I feel? And that's the mindfulness piece. And we want to label it as accurately as possible. And then, is it normal to feel this way? You know, most people say yes. And the self-kindness piece is a little more challenging for people, and it's, what do I need? And sometimes the self-kindness piece can be like, I need to reframe, or I need to just feel some gratitude right now. Or it can be like, I need to take a walk, and I need to take a break. I need to go get a cup of coffee. I need to, whatever that may be. And that's where the self-care piece often comes in. So this change in self-talk can then turn into the actual physical manifestations of self-care. So here's some examples. Again, this is kind of hard to see. You know, I'm really nervous to meet with this investor because this could be a game changer for my startup. I know it's normal to feel this way. I guess if it doesn't work out, there will be other investors down the line. So, you know, kind of compassionate. You're not saying, oh, no, this is the only chance. You're reframing a little bit and zooming out and looking at the situation through a bigger lens. That's the self-kindness piece. So, you know, the next example is, I'm really frustrated. There's the labeling with my CFO, who's always blocking my awesome new ideas. I see this a lot. I know it's normal, so it's the normalizing piece, to have conflict because we have different strengths. I guess I'm grateful. There's the self-kindness piece, the normalization piece and the self-kindness piece. I guess I'm grateful that he keeps me in check. So here's just a couple of examples about how we can use that inner cheerleader to talk back to that inner a-hole, using self-compassion to neutralize the stress response to then access higher brain function. And again, this takes virtually no extra time. It's just a practice that you have going on in your head. So it's a really, really great way to self-care when you're a busy executive. So again, the startup success skills that you guys rely on for success, critical thinking, decision making, these are all higher brain function skills. And in order to be able to access them, you have to recover from stress. And if you don't have any time to recover from stress, you can at least change your self-talk, replace that inner a-hole with a voice of self-compassion in those 3 very specific ways, and neutralize the stress response and access higher brain function. So let's review, and I'm going to basically say all of that again. What did we learn? Startup success is a marathon, not a sprint. How can you reach the finish line with your health and relationships intact, which is very important to your investors? You got a problem, right? You have no time. You need that IV of caffeine. And stress is good, revolutionary. It keeps you alive and it helps you grow or have a startup that succeeds. Chronic stress is bad. It hijacks your brain. Recovery is essential to avoid chronic stress. So after each stress trigger, your body and brain need to recover to avoid negative chronic stress. That means that self-care is essential. If you want to use your best brain, self-care is necessary for recovery. There's no way around that. And self-care starts with self-talk. So if you replace your inner a-hole with your inner cheerleader, that can be an easy way to practice self-care when you have no extra time. And self-compassion is legit. I think a lot of people think it's like wooey, but self-compassion is actually shown to neutralize the stress response so you can use your best brain. Okay, so let's discuss and see what kind of questions you guys have. I'm going to exit out of this, stop my share.
Perfect. So thank you, Sarah, for that great presentation. And I'm going to open it up to some questions. Again, anyone participating can type questions into the chat function. So send them our way and I can field some. I have one, Sarah, just to kind of kick off the Q&A session here, is a lot of what you mentioned around self-care and self-talk and compassion for yourself being incredibly important. A lot of founders, though, can get so wrapped up in their self, their own mind, their brain. So what is your recommendation in kind of translating this from self to sharing that self with others and relying on others, mentors, peers, to kind of help you through some of those really stressful and kind of toxic moments?
Yeah, I mean, listen, I'm a coach, right? So like, you know, hiring a coach is a really great way to get started with that. And I'm not saying you have to hire me. You can if you feel connected. But you know, hiring a coach is a really smart way to get started on that, because you're setting time aside to have someone who can call you out on it when that inner a-hole's really getting loud. And also walk you through those steps of self-compassion, or whatever that particular coach's methodology is, to help you reframe and de-stress and use that, get access to that higher brain function again. And if a coach, let's say, isn't in your budget, or isn't one of your interests, using a mentor. I have another, a president of another financial firm who his wife used to work in HR, and he needs that time with her every day. And he goes home and just has like 30 minutes where he talks to her, and that is his recharge time. And she knows his particular, she knows the voice of his inner a-hole just as well as he does. And she can help kind of walk him through, zooming out, reframing, having more gratitude, normalizing it, stuff like that. So, kind of what you mentioned, having a mentor, even your wife, a coach to help walk you through it. But I think also demonstrating it within your organization. So if you hear of another, let's say another member of your C-suite, or even a staff member being really, really hard on themselves, even helping walk them through it, we can often learn by teaching. And if it becomes a really pronounced part of your culture, it can actually help everybody elevate to a higher brain function. And when you are, in that environment, it will make it easier for you too.
Awesome. I don't have any questions coming through right now, so I can keep asking maybe one or two more questions until someone submits, or we can always do follow-up questions once we send this recording out. But just another question, something that was discussed again back at the Jumpstart Founders Summit is kind of how to manage your time between, family. Sarah, you're a great example where you just, 3 months ago have a newborn. I see a lot of our founders that kind of go through that too. They're early in their marriages or relationships, start families while also starting a company. How do you, or what would you recommend to particularly young families, or a founder that is, part of a younger family, to manage their time, manage those priorities, particularly when, again, in the early stages, a lot of these early investors are relying on the founders or hounding the founders. Kind of what are some tactics that you can suggest to the people in that position?
That's a huge challenge, right? You have a young family, you have children who want your undivided attention, and then you have your company who wants your undivided attention, and then you still need the self-care.
Want your undivided attention as well.
Exactly. And so I think that the best advice I could give in a situation like that is that no matter what you're doing, to be present. And by that I mean, increase your awareness of how you are in that moment. Because a lot of times you're spending time with your children, but you're also, on your emailing or you're texting. I get on my husband about that all the time. He's a VC, he's a venture capitalist, and he'll be like, "Oh, just a second." And I'm like, no. Like, that 5 minutes for our child of like undivided attention and focus will mean so much more to her than an hour where you are texting. And the same thing goes with your company, like being really, really present. But here's the thing too that I think is really important. I coached a woman who was running her own company, and she was working about 12-hour days. And after about a month, we didn't talk at all about time blocking. We didn't talk about anything except for literally what I just taught you guys in this last half hour. And by simply changing that inner voice, she went from working 12-hour days to working about 7 to 8-hour days. And it was because of the fact that since she was able to utilize higher brain function and stop beating her up about stupid shit all day long, she was able to be more efficient right? She was able to focus more throughout the day. So when she could turn off that inner a-hole, she was able to really, really focus and be present on what she was doing, get it done way faster, and then had more time for her family. So on either end, being really present and then applying what we just talked about can go a really long way.
Awesome. Well, great. Well, I will jump back in just to say thank you, Sarah, for this great presentation. Again, I can't help but iterate the importance of self-care as a VC. Jumpstart Foundry is really invested in the health and well-being of our founders and making sure that they're putting their mental health, their physical health first. As a healthcare investor, that's kind of a no-brainer for us. And so again, to kick off 2020, I encourage any founder that sees this presentation or watches the video to really put yourself at the center, take this chance in the new year to reflect on what you're doing, your mindfulness techniques, ways that you can improve self-care for yourself and how it can improve your company and results and make your investors more confident in what you are building. So with that, I thank everyone for joining. We're wrapping up here just at kind of 35 minutes, so perfect time. Again, we'll send out this recording so everyone can have access to it later on. Feel free to send us questions, send them to Jumpstart. I'll send out an email with Sarah's contact information as well at the end of this presentation, and I hope everyone has a very healthy and happy 2020. So thank you and Happy New Year.
Thanks for joining, everybody. Bye.
Bye.